joined now by Green Senator for Queensland, Larissa Waters. Larissa, thank you for your time.
My pleasure, Annalise.
So you're calling for changes to ministerial standards. This has been a discussion with the jobs taken by Julie Bishop and Christopher Pyne since they left Parliament, but you think it needs to change for people who are in Parliament.
Look, we've got some ministerial standards, but no one would know it because they're very rarely upheld and, frankly, they're very poorly drafted. As people would probably know, we've been pushing for a proper federal anti-corruption watchdog for many, many years, and we had some success in the Senate last week where we passed that bill. It's unfortunately been put at the back of a very long line of bills now that it's gone to the House. The government really should have brought this on and dealt with it properly. They've chosen to kick it off into the long grass. And so now we're refocusing and saying, look, at the very least, you need to fix up your ministerial standards, actually hold your ministers to that standard, clarify the wording and have it independently enforced. We think a federal corruption watchdog is needed, but at the very least, these standards need to be made crystal clear. There's been a bit of scandal, as people would know, with Minister Taylor and Frydenberg, and the crux of the issue is that disclosure of interests in various private companies needs to be down the line. You can't just disclose one company. You should then disclose the interest that that company holds in other companies that you might then have a conflict of interest around. So it's a complex corporate web of ministers trying to hide their private interests and trying to further their own financial interests when actually they should be acting in the public interest.
They should indeed be acting in the public interest, but it's also in the interest of the public to have people who have spent time out in the real world, have spent time in business and interacting with the community. So if those declarations are made to the current standards, what's wrong with that? Well,
the declarations aren't being properly made. The government maintains that everybody's complied when in fact Minister Taylor didn't disclose that his main company in which he did declare an interest had a majority interest in a subsequent company that he was then lobbying for favours for, in essence. So I'm afraid if the standards are not clear enough that the government can somehow maintain everything's fine, go back to sleep, well, the standards need to be made clearer. We think the obligation should be for full disclosure, not just for the head companies, but also for the subsidiaries. And if there's a conflict of interest, you should divest. You shouldn't be having two masters. You should be doing your job to act in the public interest as a minister of the government, not furthering your own nest or looking for future employment prospects. This is exactly why the majority of Australians think that all politicians are corrupt.
Now, we just had Bill Shorten on a short time ago. He was talking about the NDIS, but we also asked him about the climate change target for the Labor Party, the 45% target. He said it cost them votes at the election because the Greens were going around Queensland running a scare campaign. Do you think that's fair?
No. If you call putting the climate science into the public domain and calling for Labor to have a strong position against opening new coal mines a scare campaign, then that's not accurate. We were simply saying Queenslanders deserve real jobs. They deserve jobs in healthy and sustainable industries that are going to last, not lies about jobs that won't eventuate in a dying industry. So I'm afraid I take a different view on why the Labor vote tanked in Queensland. I think it's because they tried to have their cake and eat it too and say one thing about Adani, depending on where they were, and another thing in Queensland. They needed to have taken a position and taken a strong stand based on the climate science. And it is looking very worryingly like that their already fairly weak standards are going to drop further on emissions, and that would be really the wrong call to make. The government are full of climate deniers. They are the government at the moment. We need strong climate laws. We want Labor to keep their standards high, keep their targets high, work with us to challenge the government to do better.
As you acknowledged, Labor did tank in Queensland and you had a very vocal campaign on the ground. So is that not logical that you did cost Labor votes?
Well, people vote how they wish. The Greens put a policy out there to say we want strong climate action. We want to generate jobs in alternative industries. We want thriving regional Queensland communities.
But you did specifically do a roadshow around regional Queensland.
We did, talking about renewable energy job creation, and we got some great support for that. That's got nothing to do with the Labor Party. They're in charge of their own policies. They make those decisions. We were putting our positive views out there based on the science, and we got a great reception. I think it's disappointing that the other parties aren't taking climate change seriously, and I think that's why you'll see a huge turnout on Friday for the climate strike. Globally, this is happening. Awareness is growing. People are demanding action from their politicians, and yet you still have massive influence being wielded by the big coal mining companies who donate to both sides of politics. Until we get that influence of dirty coal money off our decision-making, will continue to have substandard climate policies.
So you don't accept that Greens climate change policy during the election cost Labor any votes?
Well, I think people voted for a whole variety of reasons. I think people voted for the Greens' strong position to take action on climate change and to generate sustainable, lasting jobs for Queenslanders in the regions and elsewhere. Whether or not they switch their votes from other parties, people can look over the numbers and form their own views. But I think what's clear is that our vote was really strong. We got a big increase. It was a ringing endorsement. And we stand by that. And we think regional Queenslanders deserve better than lies about fake jobs that are never going to eventuate from a company that lines the pockets of both sides of politics.
Larissa Waters, thank you for your time.
My pleasure.